you're banished from the lands between, tarnished, and on a quest for eternal glory. Hey there friends, it's Livid here, and welcome back to Legacy Gaming. Today we are diving into FromSoft's hotly anticipated open-world RPG, Elden Ring. If we take a quick look at the Steam charts, one of the most useful tools for gauging the popularity and potential success of a new title, you'll see that Elden Ring is the second most anticipated game with a staggering 260,000 plus followers. With such a rich history of games including the likes of Demon's Souls, Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne, and Sekiro in the studio's library, some of my favorite games of all time, it's no surprise that there's so much hype around this newest entry. Notice I did leave out Dark Souls 2 for good reason. In this ultimate preview, we'll be exploring everything from the overarching story and world that you'll be experiencing, all the way down to various aspects concerning combat and progression. Now while I'll aim to be as thorough as possible, a lot of the finer details of the game and various things along the path of discovery will come as we continue coverage once Elden Ring releases, so be sure to stay up to date with our channel. If you've played any of FromSoft's previous titles, you know that the studio has always been relatively hands-off with their story, opting instead to bury most information in lore tabs, item descriptions, and select NPCs that you come across. Now this time, Hidetaka Miyazaki is in charge of the story, and George R.R. Martin is directly contributing to sculpting the mythos, comprised of the game's overall narrative and belief system. Now let me tell you, after a solid 15 hours with the closed network test, this was extremely apparent even with only the tiniest amount of content available, and this story will be much more character-focused. Elden Ring has you assuming the role of a Tarnished, a descendant of a tribe once blessed by the light of grace, now expelled from the kingdom and stripped of their light. The legend has promised them Elden Lordship, and you will relive the Shattering, transported to an age long ago and experience the war that brought darkness to the lands between. If a new Elden Lord does rise, they will lift the veil of shadows that has fallen over Marika's domain, purging the land of her demigod offspring, each one laying claim to a great rune, fractured shards of the Elden Ring. Stand ready, Tarnished, and prepare to claim what fate has promised. The emphasis on a compelling, character-driven story is just one advancement Elden Ring aims to make on the Souls series. The other, dropping the player into an expansive open world. Now the traditional, linear dungeon settings ultimately culminating in large boss fights are still very much present, and will instead serve as the critical paths players can head down in order to experience the nearly 30-hour-long main story. Now this doesn't account for any of the optional content in the game, and this is where the open world element comes into play. Out of the 15 hours that I spent so far, just in the very first zone of the map, maybe 3 to 4 of that was focused on the main story. Taking just a quick look at the massive map that we've been introduced to so far, I fully expect this game to have nearly 90 or more hours of potential gameplay on just a single character playthrough. FromSoft saturated the landscape with numerous enemy encampments that often feature an elite or chests that contain items or abilities essential to your overall progression. They also sprinkled in a ton of dungeons that occupy the subterranean portion of the lands between, often filled with unique enemies, traps, loot, and bosses. Now, there are also some environmental objects that are destructible if you manage to bait certain enemies into destroying them. One such example is the Church of Ela in Limgrave. You can bait the Tree Sentinel, an open-world boss, into destroying sections of it, allowing you to mount up and climb to hidden secrets. Another example is a fractured statue that holds a cache of smithing stone shards that require you to bait a giant into destroying it. Now things like this are scattered all over the open world, and really give the player always something to pay attention for and do. With the addition of an open world comes a lot of other changes simply due to the nature of the environment that you'll be traversing. Since these aren't just linear paths that can be easily blocked off and laid out in a maze-like structure, new traversal options have been added, some of which have dramatic implications for both combat and exploration. Now it might sound a bit ridiculous, but jumping fundamentally changes up the entire gameplay loop in a Souls game. You are no longer restricted to those focused paths and corridors for every single thing you do. Puzzles and alternate paths become more expertly hidden, woven into the environment instead of constantly using just simple levers and false walls. Even combat, something we'll get into in just a bit, significantly changes, being able to use terrain to your advantage when dealing with enemy pathing or even circumventing an area entirely to attack from a completely different angle. Sekiro made that pretty apparent, but on a much more extreme level that wasn't exactly Dark Souls in essence and feel. Then there's also the addition of Torrent, the first time in a Souls game that your character gains the use of a mount, for both traversal and combat. Despite this system being fairly basic, it also fundamentally shifts how you approach everything. Because your mount has the ability to sprint and double jump, there are numerous secrets where you need to platform while mounted that lead to secret items, caches of resources, and just ways to avoid situations altogether. Additionally, because of the new open world element, having a mount allows for quick traversal around any open world area, while still keeping the traditional dungeon and PvP experience we've grown to love untouched. You may even find yourself biting off more than you initially bargained for in the open world with groups of enemies. With the ability to quickly summon a mount and dip out of there, it allows you to save yourself a death, or the need to head into such hostile areas again just to retrieve your runes. Now, mounted combat is also a new feature that's part of this, and while it might just be better to approach situations on foot most of the time, larger enemies such as this massive dragon that appears in the open world will require you to traverse large distances to getting close for damage. With how regularly that it breathes fire, as well as how large of an AoE you have to deal with, being able to mount up and get up to the boss quickly is extremely useful and often needed. Having access to new features like this also allows for a much wider array of potential enemies and bosses, and let's be honest, that's one of the main reasons everyone loves Souls games. Something veteran players of Souls games likely never expected to see in a future title was a map. But again, Elden Ring is leaning hard into its new open world format, meaning there will be quite the sprawling map, and honestly, the implementation here, it's perfect. Starting out, your map will be completely blank, and unlike most open world games, in order to make pieces of the map show up, you'll need to actually locate map fragments. Now these are scattered all around the world, and upon interacting with one, a large chunk of the map will become visible. This will then allow you to see landmarks that you've personally discovered, and even place up to 100 of your own personal markers, perfect for tracking valuable items, encounters that you need to revisit, or loot that you can't quite figure out how to reach just yet. You can even place beacons, allowing you to see a column of light from a great distance away, marking the location that you are set out to explore. You'll be happy to know though, or maybe you won't, that this map only extends to the overworld. All dungeons and underground areas function just like they would in any other Souls game, removing your access to a map and just leaving you to your dungeon navigating abilities. Another thing all veteran Souls players are pretty used to at this point is death, and having to repeat large sections of content after a fatal misstep. It's something that we enjoy, but has also likely turned away plenty of the more casual audience. Now in Elden Ring, sure, that is still a thing, but there are definitely major adjustments to respawn mechanics and just how much you'll need to repeat after a death, really opening the door for the more casual audience of players to get into this game. The Sites of Lost Grace, aka bonfires, are where you go to basically do everything, like respawn, refill your HP and FP flasks, reset enemy spawns, level up, adjust your equipped spells, and adjust your Ashes of War. You can even fast travel from anywhere on the map using the Sites of Lost Grace. These are also more frequently placed, meaning you have less things that you need to redo before getting back to where you were. Couple that with a new addition. The Stakes of Marika are little statues that also work like Sites of Lost Grace in terms of being respawn points, and players will find themselves not being punished nearly as hard from dying. Sure, you still drop all of your runes and you need to go pick them back up, but you aren't trekking halfway across an open world map to do so. One of the first things that you'll do in Elden Ring is choose your class. During the network test, we got to try out 5 of the 10 classes that will be available at launch. Now classes, they dictate your starting stats and starting equipment, but as you progress within the game, you're free to build your character the way that you want. Build flexibility has been something the FromSoft team has consistently improved upon with each iteration of their games, and it looks like Elden Ring will be the most flexible when it comes to build freedom. The Enchanted Knight combines melee combat with spell casting. They start with a winged spear, Carian glintstone shield, as well as relatively sturdy armor. The Enchanted Knight starts with high strength and intelligence, which aids the class's ability to deal melee and range damage through sorceries. It's perfect for all you battle mages out there. The second class is the Prophet, a class that focuses primarily on incantations, the faith-based magic in Elden Ring. Prophets start the game with a club, a rickety shield, and various pieces of cloth armor. During the network test, there was no access to faith-scaling weapons, which makes the Prophet's already weak melee damage even more noticeable. But the class's high faith and access to Beast Claw makes it one of the most viable magic-wielding classes to start the game. If you're looking for a more classic Souls experience, then the Bloody Wolf class is the right one for you. This class starts out by wielding a bastard sword and is equipped with heavy armor. The Bloody Wolf has high strength and vigor, which makes them the most traditional melee class in the game. The fourth class is the Champion, a hybrid warrior faith user that deals decent damage in melee, but is also able to tap into incantations. The Champion starts the game with the Battle Axe and the Finger Seal, which gives them immediate access to incantations. The Champion is also the only class that starts the game with a Dragonfire incantation. The Champion has high faith and strength, but relatively low mind, which means their magical capabilities are somewhat limited right out of the gate. The final class available during the network test was the Warrior, the only class that starts the game with 2 weapons. The Warrior has high dexterity and decent endurance. Because of the dual-wielding nature of this class, the Warrior relies heavily on dodge rolling to completely avoid enemy attacks. Because the Warrior has the highest starting dexterity, players that want to focus on archery may also want to consider this class. One important thing to note is that all weapons, armor, sorceries, and incantations that these classes start with can also be found in the open world. When choosing your class, you should really be picking one based on its base stat spread and personal playstyle. Now, in terms of overall character progression, we felt it a bit necessary, considering this is an ultimate preview, to go over exactly how your stats break down in Elden Ring, since picking your class is just the start of your journey. Now, there are a total of 8 main attributes that the player can increase through leveling up, and each stat has a very real effect on multiple aspects of your build, from how much HP and stamina you have, all the way to your equipment load and what weapons or spells you can actually wield successfully. Vigor governs your total HP, but also has the added bonus of affecting your fire and poison resistance. Mind governs your FP, the critical resource that you need for all manners of spells. This also affects your focus-related resistances. Endurance governs your overall stamina, but also affects your physical defense power. Strength is the primary attribute required to wield heavy armaments, both armors and weapons. This will also boost the attack power of anything that scales with strength and raise your maximum equipment load. Dexterity has a fair number of bonuses. Aside from being the primary attribute required to wield advanced armaments, it also reduces the casting time of spells, softens fall damage, and makes it more difficult to be knocked off your mount. Just like strength, dexterity will boost the attack power of dexterity scaling weapons. Intelligence, as you'd imagine, is the primary attribute required to perform varying degrees of glintstone sorceries. Additionally, this also boosts magic damage for intelligence scaling sorceries and weapons, as well as improving your overall magic resistance. Now, faith is the attribute required to perform incantations. Simply put, the higher your faith, the more damage you deal with incantations and weapons that scale with faith. Last up is arcane, and this directly ties into discovery. Discovery governs the likelihood of finding items on the corpses or defeated enemies. It's essentially luck. This will also affect death resistance and certain sorceries and incantations. As with all Souls games, Elden Ring being no different, you'll collect rune fragments, and while these can be used to buy or trade for items in the game, runes will also be needed to level up your character and their stats. If something ever feels too challenging all of a sudden, consider farming up some runes, leveling up a bit, and trying that challenge again. You might be surprised at the results. Aside from all this, there are of course a ton more stats to break down, like resistances, offensive and defensive stats and ailments, and even equipment stats and damage types. I think knowing what base attributes to invest in is way more important and easily explained than all those other stats, so we will leave those for another more advanced video. Now, you can't have a FromSoft game without armor. Now, I'm sad to say that Elden Ring still isn't leaning into set bonuses with armor, which is really unfortunate for build variety. Because while a lot of players will still engage in the Fashion Souls element of things, as usual, all others will just find whatever gives the most optimal stats. It's a criticism that I've long had of the Souls series, and maybe you share that sentiment, but armor is one aspect of Elden Ring that really hasn't been elevated. That being said, the armor still looks as badass as ever. Each set is divided up into pieces, such as helms, chest armor, gauntlets, and leg armor. Each piece of armor provides players with a specific level of protection, and equally as important, damage resistances, to things like magic, fire, lightning, holy, and even the various forms of physical damage. Now, up until now, we've showcased the Bloody Wolf set, Carrion Knight set, Champion set, the Swordsman set, the Raya Lucarian set, and the Prophet set in the background, with my favorite so far visually being the Crucible set. I'm really excited to see what other armor sets await discovery. Maybe there'll even be some returning Dark Souls favorites. Now, weapons are the other iconic element of Souls game, coming back in Elden Ring in a very similar but also improved way. The big change right off the top is that upgrading is more straightforward in Elden Ring, since gems and other materials don't exist. And with most of those older systems being replaced by the new Ashes of War system, Essentially, all weapons in Elden Ring come with inherent skills, generally activated through your L2 button. Now, most of these weapons can have their skills completely replaced with a different Ash of War, something that we will talk about in greater detail in the next section. Now, this means weapons have become infinitely more flexible to your build. And let me tell you, there are quite a lot of choices. Daggers, straight swords, greatswords, curved swords, katanas, double-edged swords, axes, spears, bows, and likely many more, all make their appearance in Elden Ring. All of these weapons, just like previous FromSoft titles, have stat requirements that must be met to wield the weapon effectively, meaning if you aren't spec'd correctly, the game will lock you out of that weapon's skill and affect your overall effectiveness with that weapon. Paying attention to your overall stats is incredibly important to your overall combat effectiveness, and the scaling of each weapon directly correlates to a specific stat. Pump a lot into intelligence, and wield a sword as your primary source of damage, and you're likely going to have a rough time. Power stancing is also making a big return, meaning if you do wield weapons of the same attribute and style, you'll get unique combo attacks and bonuses that further change up your playstyle. On top of that, understanding Elden Ring's damage types is essential, but probably best left to their own video. Just know, at a base level, there are both physical and elemental damage types, and inside those two types are subcategories, like strike, slash, and pierce damage on the physical end, and magic, fire, lightning, and holy damage on the elemental side of things. Trial and error on various enemies will help you establish what they are weak to, so you can adjust accordingly, die less, and get through those fights. As we just talked about, one of the new features coming to Elden Ring are Ashes of War, essentially weapon arts from Dark Souls 3, but with a whole lot more flexibility. These essentially are special items found on bosses and enemies, as well as various corpses around the world, that when applied to a weapon, modifies the damage type of the target weapon, and also provides a new special skill. This allows players to dynamically adjust their preferred weapons to their respective build and playstyle. These are also always in fixed locations, meaning once you find them, you can easily obtain them again for subsequent playthroughs. The benefit of this is that you can fully upgrade your weapons down one fixed path, then apply an Ash of War to change up where and how you use it. As I mentioned, each Ash of War will change the damage type and scaling of the weapon, so it's important that we talk about the variety at your disposal. A keen Ash of War, such as Piercing Fang or Repeating Thrust, will increase dexterity scaling, but decrease strength and base damage. A quality Ash of War, such as Stormblade, balances strength and dexterity scaling, but decreases your base damage. A lightning Ash of War, such as Thunderbolt, will add potent lightning damage to your weapon, but decrease base damage and strength scaling. A magic Ash of War, such as Glint Sword Arc, will add magic damage and intelligence scaling, but reduce your base damage, strength, and dexterity scaling. Lastly, Sacred Ashes of War, such as Holy Ground, will add holy damage, decrease physical damage, and your strength scaling. A really important thing to understand, however, is that there are still some restrictions on what weapons can accept Ashes of War, and even what ashes work on specific weapons. Some can't be used because the nature of that Ash of War doesn't work on that animation set. There very well could be more Ashes of War types than this that open up more options and reduce restrictions. But as of the limited testing period players have gotten their hands on, this is what we currently know. Now, for those of you that have played previous Souls games, summons in a broad sense might not be very new to you. In Elden Ring, FromSoft has evolved the concept of NPC summons to now be dedicated skills that allow the summoning of fallen souls of enemies that you've both defeated and that reside on corpses throughout the lands between. These are completely separate from skills, spells, weapons, armor, and even co-op summons. In order to summon spirits, you'll need a few things. First, you'll need to locate the respective spirit caller's ash. These are the specific items that are bound to each different type of summon in the game, and once obtained, will allow you to call forth that respective spirit, such as an incredibly powerful early-game Northern Mercenary. Second, you'll need to be near a rebirth monument in order to summon spirits at all. This is a way of balancing the use of spirit summons in the open world and dungeons, since on top of the initial FP cost, once summoned, spirits will only be alive for a limited time or until killed, whichever comes first. The other condition is that during boss fights, spirits may only be summoned once per encounter. If they die, you cannot resummon them until you beat the encounter or die yourself. While some of these summons can be incredibly potent, they also drain a sizable amount of FP depending on their strength. If not managed correctly in an encounter, they can lead to a waste of critical resources that might have been better spent elsewhere. It will definitely be interesting to see just how many summons there are and what you can potentially do with them in Elden Ring once released. Now, it wouldn't be a Souls game if we didn't talk about the use of magic, and in Elden Ring, there looks to be no shortage of options on that front. These can range from offensive elemental magic all the way to healing and support-based spells that lean more towards defensive playstyles, all of which can typically affect both players and enemies. Now, these come in two distinct forms, the first being sorcery. In order to use sorceries, you'll need to have a staff equipped and lean heavy into the intelligence staff. Some of the sorcery that we've managed to get a look at include the Carrion Piercer, allowing you to summon a magical blade, greatly extending your reach. There are also options like Meteorite, where you summon down 3 offensive meteorites onto your target, and Briars of Sin, that sacrifice a bit of your health each time in exchange for increasing damage. The other form of magic comes from incantation spells, requiring that your character have a sacred seal equipped and instead be heavily spec'd into the Faith Staff. These, from what we've seen so far in the network test, can often put out an insane amount of damage, but also use a significant amount of FP. 2 of the most popular so far includes Beast Claw, a starting equipment of the Prophet class that conjures 5 offensive waves of energy that travel forward in a claw-like pattern, and Dragonfire, also a starting equipment for the Champion class, that lets you conjure a dragon head that spews flames out in front of you for a high FP cost. Now, both of these can be found in the world as well, just keep that in mind. Incantations also seem to include a ton of healing and status curing spells, such as Urgent Heal, Heal, and Cure Poison. There were 11 total incantations and 7 sorceries in the network test, just in the tiny area that we had to explore. So when the whole map opens up on release, we can only imagine how many options magic-based builds will have at their disposal. The open world of Elden Ring presents so many possibilities to players, but also challenges the developers to come up with solutions for systems that most players expect to be present in the game, namely PvP. Elden Ring will feature 2 different forms of PvP. Using an item called a Duelist Furled Finger, players can lay down a challenge marker, once seen in other players' games, that let them know they're ready for a duel. Any other eligible player can accept that challenge and thus a duel commences. Whoever wins the duel is awarded a stash of rune fragments. The second form of PvP is the more traditional invasion method, made famous in previous Souls games. Using the Bloody Finger item, an attacking player can seek out vulnerable players and invade their world. Much like in other Souls games, this now becomes a case of cat and mouse, but because of the massive open world, it's still kind of unclear exactly how this will play out, including how it will function when participating in co-op with other players. PvP has largely been a staple of FromSoft's games, but the introduction of an open world presents the team with a number of issues, mainly just the scale, which is a huge issue when you consider that 2 players trying to find themselves in a much bigger area is going to be a much different experience. It's already been confirmed that a player can't be invaded while they're mounted, so there's even more complexities there. The FromSoft team has been relatively quiet about PvP changes and implementation, which has led to a lot of online discussion, namely around if invasions should be an opt-in or opt-out system. Souls PvP has developed a sort of cult following, and to be in the dark on such a popular system, considering all of the changes to the Souls formula with Elden Ring, means that there is still much more to learn about PvP come launch. In terms of co-op, you'll be happy to know FromSoft is still iterating on this with each Souls game, and in Elden Ring, all players will immediately start with an item called the Tarnished Furled Finger. This is not a consumable item, and can be used as many times as you like to place your golden summon sign on the ground, allowing you to be summoned into other players' games. Not unlike the password system used in later Dark Souls games, you will simply set a keyword to create a group. As long as the player who leaves a message or bloodstain is part of your group, their messages will be prioritized and even highlighted in-game. While the game only supports up to 4 players co-oping in a single session, the group formed from the keyword system has no player limit, and in a way, you could use this to form almost miniature guilds. Now, if you aren't interested in being part of a group and prefer the more randomized co-op experience, Fur-Calling Finger Remedies will be your go-to, allowing you to see all manner of summon signs in the world. Whether you want to band together with friends, randoms, or go it alone, the options are all there for you. Finally, the last piece that I just wanted to touch on are covenants or factions. Now, these are confirmed to be a feature of Elden Ring, but we just don't know how or to what capacity. These are essentially player-chosen allegiances to specific deities or groups of NPCs, and based on previous titles, these can affect a player's gameplay by changing certain online interactions or present unique items and enemies to obtain special rewards in the vein of magic, weapons, and even armor, so they are almost certainly worth looking into when the time comes. Whether you are a veteran of the Dark Souls series or just diving into the Souls genre for the first time with Elden Ring, you can be sure there will be plenty to explore, collect, and fight. This isn't a huge reinvention of their previous titles, but it has enough significant additions to the formula to truly make Elden Ring a unique entry in the gaming landscape. Now don't forget, this is not a review, simply a preview based on all the information available out there, including our own time with the early network tests. That being said, what I managed to play was honestly my favorite Souls experience to date. Given the time and area that we were restricted to, this only excites me more once the whole game opens up. Now we only put out Ultimate Preview videos for games that we plan on covering, so if you want more Elden Ring videos in your feed, consider dropping us a like and consider subscribing to the channel. You can even join us on Discord. It's the best way to stay locked into everything going on in the channel, and we'll be opening up a brand new section of the server before the game goes live, so you can find people to potentially co-op with or share information with your fellow Tarnished. Finally, if you like our content and want to support Legacy Gaming just a little bit more, you can do so by becoming a member. This helps us evolve the channel and support our efforts towards becoming full-time content creators. So check out the join button below to learn more. My name is Livid, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.